Hello, everyone. This is Justin Tolles from the Aching Dump Advanced Aviation team. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we'll be talking about fighting fire from higher, how UAS and UAVs are being used to combat the wildland fires out west. We've got a great lineup today, and a lot of expertise on this particular webinar, and I'm going to go into some of those speakers' bios right now. So we'd like to first welcome Ryan Gifford, Captain Ryan Gifford, from who's the UAV program manager from the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District, and he is also the coordinator for the Sacramento Regional UAV Operators Group. So thanks for joining us, Ryan. We also have Frank Granados, who's an engineer with the Orange County Fire Authority and also serves as the UAS program manager there for the department. And last but not least, we have Dave Whitmer, who is the co-owner and chief operating officer of Global UAS Solutions. And Dave has decades of experience in wildland firefighting, including roles with the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management in Alaska, as well as the chief of fire operations for the Alaska Fire Service there, where among other programs, he oversaw the Alaska Smoke Jumpers and the Chena Hotshot crews, on both of which he previously served as a team member. In addition to all that, Dave also has his private pilot's license, so a lot of experience in the UAS and aviation side as well. And Dave is no longer with the federal government, has retired to join his long-term friend and colleague, Gary Baumgartner, there with Global UAS Solutions, and is still working on a lot of those issues today. So again, great panel. Thank you to all three of you for joining us today. I know you're all joining us from the West Coast or further, so we certainly appreciate that. And today what we're going to basically do is get into this issue we've all been seeing in the news recently. I mean, the absolutely horrendous fires and the tragic loss of property and life out west, and in this season does not look like it's going to end anytime soon. So there's a lot of concern, and we had a lot of our clients and a lot of folks in the industry asking a lot of questions about, how are UAS being used, what other technology can be used or accelerated to kind of help combat this issue. And as a volunteer firefighter for the past 20 years myself, this issue strikes home for me especially. So I'm really happy to get all these guys on the line and talk about this issue and hopefully kind of bring some insight. So without any further ado, what we'll do is we'll ask each one of our panelists to kind of go over their experience, their programs, how they've come about, and how they're utilizing this technology to combat not only wildland fires, but any other natural disasters and other emergency incidents that are out there, and kind of where they see things, where they envision things going in the future. And from that, we'll start to take it after each one of them gives us kind of a high-level overview. We'll dig in and ask some questions from there. So with that, we'll get started with Captain Gifford, and we'll go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate you taking the time and having us on. Our program started in earnest about 4 years ago, and we've been screwing around with it a little bit before that. We started, as a lot of programs start, we saw technology as being an option for something that we could grow and make more useful, better decisions. Being a metropolitan agency, we cover a vast majority of Sacramento County. So we actually have about 400 and some square miles of service area. It's broken up with everything from strict rural to wildland urban interface to residential, industrial, commercial. We have a 9-mile section of the Sacramento River that we're responsible for. We spend a lot of time on that. So we started our program, and the build out was rocky, as I think it is for kind of a lot of the folks when we first got started. You just don't know what you don't know. I will say that as we were going through this, the FAA was hugely helpful with us getting our program set up and doing it the right way, and making sure that we understood what their interpretation was and what they wanted, which is interesting, right? It's a different thing to look at for them for sure. But to that point, our program has grown. We fly 17 aircraft right now, and we have somewhere in the ballpark of 25 pilots. Guys are still in training. We have a fair amount of full-time pilots. So we cover all three of our on-duty shifts with multiple pilots each day. We are able to deploy those aircraft pretty much anywhere within the county, very quickly, actually. Additionally, when we were building out our program, one of the things we noticed quickly was that there seemed to be a vacuum of information. But, the reality is you start asking around and ask your neighboring agencies if they've even considered this UAS idea or not, and you find very quickly that almost everybody has. So we started the Sacramento Regional UAV Operators Group about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it exploded exponentially. We've got 31 both law and fire agencies that are involved. There's some state agencies that are involved. And what you find is that everybody's looking for information. So we've been very fortunate to help several agencies in the area start their programs, and we've seen a very robust response from that. Really kind of been able to push the edge of some of the edge of the envelope a little bit with some of these programs as they build out. It's been a great experience for us, and really that's pushed across to the state level. Sit on Firescope UAS working group. For those of you who aren't familiar, Firescope is an advisory group to California Office of Emergency Services, basically a technology and best practices advisory group for all things fire related on the state level. So obviously some key players there are CAL FIRE, federal forestry is involved as well because they have a stake in California, and then most of the major agencies within California have representatives on that. So we've been working towards a statewide requirements and programs over the last 2 years to get the state accreditation system, if you will, the authorization and rostering system set up for UAS. So it's definitely a technology that you don't see going anywhere. I think it's been explained to me, and I agree. It's one of those technologies where when you look back in 20 or 30 years, it's going to be one of those that there's no doubt that it was going to stick around. Things come and go in the fire service, and this is one of those that just because of what it brings to the scene and what it's already brought, especially on the federal level, what it's already brought to the scene, it's just something that you're going to see everybody involved with. And that's why we're seeing the exponential growth out here that we are. So I definitely see growth, and I see continued involvement. I see continued usage. I see advanced usage, maybe more on the autonomous scale. But there's a lot of stuff to figure out, not the least of which is cost, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about, is budgets and what that actually looks like for agencies to start programs and maintain programs properly, because it's not just going down to Best Buy and buying a rotocopter. It's way more complicated than that, and it needs to be done properly. If we're not doing it properly, we're going to find big roadblocks, and understandably so, from the FAA. So that's kind of where we came from, and it's where I think we're going, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Really appreciate it. And next we'll turn over to Dave. Take it away, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you, Justin. So as Justin mentioned, I am recently retired from federal service. I worked in Alaska for the majority of my career with the Alaska Fire Service, which is part of Bureau of Land Management. And so I'm going to speak kind of briefly to that portion of my UAV experience. And then now that I've been retired, I'll speak briefly also to kind of what we're doing in post-retirement. So with Alaska Fire Service, it was about 5 or 6 years ago that we started looking at UAV for on fire line kinds of applications. And like anything, and Captain Gifford mentioned it, it was kind of met with a lot of resistance. It was new. It was a bright, shiny object that a lot of people thought was going to be just kind of a flash in the pan and would move on. It wouldn't stick around. But one of the things that we quickly realized as we started working through how to integrate UAS into fire operations was just the tremendous amount of value that it did provide, not only just in situational awareness for our firefighters on the ground, but just the associated risk reduction and exposure reduction that stuff was allowing us. And so particularly in Alaska, we're heavily reliant on aviation operations. We don't have many roads systems up there to base our firefighting operations off of. So we're largely aviation oriented organization to begin with, and the UAS just really complemented that through the use of of these just small UAS we'd give to our smoke jumpers and our hotshot crews and some of our fire specialists. They could go out there in the field and start gaining real-time situational awareness information that would have otherwise required, a real high dollar value asset, a helicopter or a fixed wing to come over and give them. So it really kind of propelled us into having to build the program. My business partner, Gary Baumgartner with Global UAS Solutions, was not able to make it today, but he was the state aviation manager for the Alaska BLM for several years and was responsible for standing up partially responsible. He was the lead for standing up the UAS program for all of Alaska BLM. And so over the course of those 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of growing pains, as Captain Gifford mentioned, just trying to figure out how to integrate with other agencies, the FAA, figuring out the dance with the airspace and how we're going to operate out in, in the airspace. So it was, it's been a very valuable program moving forward for us. It has certainly been hugely beneficial to the firefighter on the ground. I did not mention some of the things besides situational awareness that we use it for, but the whole prescribed fire, doing burnouts and back burns, things like that, just cost reduction, risk reduction, all those positive things. So I very much agree with Captain Gifford that this is not something that's going to be going away. It's going to just get bigger and bigger, in my opinion. It's going to be critical that we do figure out how to continue to grow the programs responsibly, how to integrate with the rest of the players that are out there. As a private pilot myself, it frightens me to see the volume of small UAS that are up flying around in the airspace. Everyone has a right to be there, but we just have to figure out how to do that correctly. Just real quickly, I'll switch over to my Global UAS Solutions hat here. It's a company Gary and I started up, both of us retired. And what we're about is kind of focusing on a little bit of what I've touched on already, and that is helping both the federal agencies and state, local, and cooperator agencies get the best training they can for how to be operating in the wildland fire environment. And it's not, it isn't just going down to Best Buy and buying a rotocopter. It is much more, I'm parroting Ryan here, but it is much more complicated than that. And the airspace coordination, the communication, and just the primarily the coordination piece that you'd have to do that requires some training that you can't really get many places just yet. And so we kind of saw this niche opportunity to make sure that everyone who's out there in the wildland fire environment is trained up as best they can be. And so that's kind of the focus of our company. And I think with that, Justin, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. Appreciate it. Great insight there. And last but not least, we'll turn over to Frank. Frank, take it away.
All right, thank you, Justin. Frank Granados, Orange County Fire apparatus engineer. I'm the drone program manager. We've developed our program for about 3 years now. And just like everyone's issues as far as trying to coordinate with all the different agencies, it's definitely been a learning opportunity for everybody to try and figure out what's the appropriate action to take in order to get clearance. But we started just as a basic training and more of an audio and video opportunity for our department, where we wanted to provide different type of perspective for our graduations and different video projects. But it slowly grew into something more. And obviously we know now it's more of the public safety, and the technology has increased with the thermal imaging cameras, the Zoom capabilities. So we grew from just only having 3 Phantom 4s, and now we have a total of 8 different aircrafts, which we have anywhere between the Matrice and the DJI Enterprise Dual, and also the Zooms. So we have a total of 8 aircrafts and have grown all from the DJI Phantom 4 all the way up to the Matrice. And now we're purchasing the Matrice 300, but we initially had the Matrice 210 RTK. So we grew from that. Our first couple of assignments were just only the graduations, and then we slowly started to develop our SOP and saw a window where we can branch out and do more of the wildland aspect. More of our company officers and also our chief officers were requesting. Same thing with our thermal imaging cameras on structure fires, make sure when it's out and it's cold. And they said, hey, if we can put something in the sky on a vegetation fire, make sure all our hot spots are cold, and that'll give us more confidence, and we can either reduce our resources, but we could also minimize the amount of units that are out of service. So they approached me with that problem, and I wanted to give them a solution. And like I said, with the improved thermal imaging cameras, we were able to kind of navigate that and provide those solutions for our department. So in the past 3 years, I've seen our department grow from just that small AV world where it's just videos, and to now going out on calls and getting dispatched on vegetation fires, structure fires, remote rescues, different types of calls in our department. So we also work in conjunction with Irvine Police Department. We also have a joint program where we use some of their pilot operators as well. We have a total of 10 pilots ourselves, but we also have shared 10 with Irvine PD. So Chris Bees is also a great asset to us. He's very well versed as far as the AVA. He has a FAA, and he has a very good working relationship with them. We have a airport right in our jurisdiction, which is John Wayne Airport, which is the Orange County Airport. And I'm assuming everyone else also has some difficulties with airspace, but John Wayne Airspace takes up a lot of Orange County, and it's definitely a big liability issue as far as airspace. So we always want to make sure we take the appropriate actions to make sure that we get the clearance appropriated, or the clearance needed in order to do the functions of our department needs. So fast forward to now, like I said, we have a good standard operating procedure, and we'll talk about it if you want a little bit later, Justin. But we've detailed out our procedures, especially on structure fires, what protocols we have. We have a checklist that we go through, make sure we're doing a safe operation. And I'm assuming all the other programs that are in this webinar do the same. And then now, like I said, when we get dispatched on a call, we have a checklist that we have to go off of. When we go through that checklist, we make sure we check in with the incident commander, and then just make sure we meet his needs and whatever he requests, and try to meet the objectives as it's progressed. The technology has improved, and yeah, we just want to grow it, and then hopefully it keeps going in the right direction.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Frank. Really appreciate that. As I'm listening here, I'm just curious. I'm sure there's some folks listening in that that don't have a lot of experience with the fire service, and I just wanted to touch. For those that are kind of wondering, what exactly are the use cases for these drones, UAVs in a wildland fire scenario? I think a lot of people can imagine, a drone flying over and getting some aerial surveillance, of the scene and getting some additional situational awareness. But, what else is, I think most people probably aren't aware of, prescribed burns or back burns and things of that nature where there can be controlled remote ignition and things of that nature. Maybe Dave, would you mind, or Ryan, touching on, some of those specific use cases, just quick hits on what you've been using them for?
Sure. Yeah, this is Dave. And I'll just speak briefly to a couple of the ones that we commonly see used and we have used, and to include this summer in Oregon and California as well. First one, and Frank mentioned it as well, was the use of thermal imaging, thermal IR. There's many different kinds of IR cameras out there, but what that can provide for you is when you have visibility issues for manned aircraft. So maybe it's too smoky, maybe it's nighttime and you can't fly, whatever it is, and you don't have good optical visual opportunities. We use IR, and you can see, some of these cameras are incredibly sophisticated these days, and you have really good resolution for picking up just the smallest of hot spots. And so it gives you really good situational awareness if you've had a spot fire or a slop over. We've had crews out doing firing operations at night. There's no way to know if something has gone over the hill behind them that they can't see that might be starting to flare up. And so we use thermal imaging IR out there to help us, assist us with finding that kind of thing. You also mentioned, Justin, the optical, just to get some good visual observation for situational awareness. We use that day in, day out for mapping purposes. You can use both the optical or the IR for mapping. They both have really good applications, and we get incredibly accurate perimeter detail that way by using drones as opposed to using some sort of a manned aircraft. You can't fly slow enough to get the exact perimeter. You have to kind of wag some corners. And so with UAS, we get really great level of detail where perimeters are at and spot fires and things like that. And then lastly, and you mentioned it briefly, was the prescribed firing opportunities that we have with a few different companies out there. Most notably, Drone Amplified is building what's called Ignis 2, and it's essentially the replacement ping pong ball system that we used to strap underneath of a helicopter to do firing operations. Now they've built a device that we can put under a larger drone like a Matrice 600 or something like that, and we can go do remote firing operations through the use of that drone. And not put people at risk. And we can do it in the nighttime, we can do it in daytime. There's just a ton of value and pragmatic use. So those are just a few of the examples of the use cases we've been seeing.
I would echo what Dave says. There's a whole lot of different options for that. And I think one of the things too, if you don't live in an area where you've got a lot of grass fires, wildland fires, there's a kind of a misnomer that either grass fires are just these super huge fires that you see on the news, or that they're just roadside spot fires. And the reality is that within the state, we deal with all of that. And that's a very regular basis for us for the majority of the year. So we see use for UAVs all the way from small fires, say vegetation fires down on portions of the river. It's skunking around in the duff. It's moving through underneath the trees, and that's really hard access for our guys to get in there. They're trying to move on bike trails and stuff like that. So the ability to get that aircraft up and use a combination of electro-optical and infrared cameras to pick up information and help those ground crews on relatively small fires, but in dense vegetation with difficult access, has been huge for us. We actually have a video of one of our battalion chiefs talking one of our grass rigs down a road. Like, wait, stop, back up, turn left. Okay, go forward. You're going to see a split in the road. Go to the right. And he's doing it all based off the image that the pilot is showing him. And they rode him right in on top of a spot fire, which worked great. As things get bigger and as the incident gets larger, I think that you see more use for after action stuff. So whether that's doing detailed mapping, whether it's doing burn area calculations, whether it's doing a review of the actual incident from a training perspective, those are all things that video just shows better. An aerial view just shows better. And in terms of going even further than that, when you start to get into these large fires, now we're talking about providing a type of relief for manned air crews. So one of the things we've talked about extensively with CAL FIRE and within California is, what does that integration look like? And I'll be very honest, when we first showed up to the table, we were kind of told, hey, the kids' table's over there. These are where pilots sit. And I understand why. I really do. These are some really, really solid, very well-trained, very experienced pilots, not only CAL FIRE guys, but large municipal agency guys. And we happen to have one of the only manned aviation programs in Northern California. So I kind of was expecting that. But one of the things that showed up really quickly with those pilots was there's missions that they don't want to fly. It's really not a good use to put a Firehawk over a cold line and have it fly along and waste Hobbs hours when you can do that with another tool. So they're able to go out and fly their primary missions. And then the theory is you can bring in UAS to do the work that really doesn't need to be done by them. And sometimes it is done better because of, like Dave spoke about, just the quality of the optics that are brought to bear, and the fact that you can fly at a much lower altitude. So your resolution is just that much better. So we've seen that in some of the major incidents in the past couple of years in California, where UAS teams that have gotten deployed have been used to cold hand fires, or to go through and to try to do building counts, stuff like that. And it's California. There's a lot of liability concern here. So we're still in that building phase of what does that look like when we do a manned and unmanned integration piece. But just in the past 18, 24 months, we've seen a huge reversal in the manned aviation's thought process about, hey, these are toys, get them away from me, they scare me because I don't want to wreck, totally understandable, to this is a really valuable tool that can supplement or augment the type of work that we're doing and make us more valuable to do the missions that are mission critical for manned aircraft. There's no way you're going to put a little UAS on top of a Crown Fire. The fire weather itself would push it out of the way. So that kind of, hey, you're going to be in the same area, we're dropping retardant. Yeah, probably not. But we have to learn as UAS pilots how to speak the same language, how to operate within the fire traffic area, how to be able to use the communications patterns that are long-standing for manned aviation, and to truly integrate as part of that system. So those aren't necessarily things that we have to deal with when 3 or 4 grass rigs head down to a veg fire on the river. But they certainly become a much bigger deal when we start talking about campaign fires that are stretching through state into federal forestry land. So we're going to deal with everything in between, and it's important that the systems that we build and that the legal systems that are built up and the way the authorizations are built supports that. We have terrible airspace where we are. SAC Metro has 4 airports, one of which is a DoD site within our jurisdiction. So we have Swiss cheese for access, and that's something that has to be overcome. And that's not uncommon in California, even on campaign fires. So, you know, God bless the TFR and getting some control of that airspace and making things a little bit easier, but that presents its own challenges.
Thanks, Ryan. That's actually a good segue into talking a little bit about the FAA and some of the regulations that you're dealing with as well. So to that point, one of the issues that we've had since kind of drones burst on the scene several years ago is this consistent issue with technology outpacing the regulatory framework to enable it. We've seen that when we talk about all these working groups like the Drone Advisory Committee, the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, all the various ARCs, the aviation rulemaking committees that have been out there as well. So what type of regulatory advancements will be key to enabling the operations that you guys see as critical in the public safety sector? For example, was that beyond visual line of sight, remote ID? Is it flight over people, nighttime operations, and so forth? Frank, we'll come back to you first on this one. What are your thoughts?
So our biggest thing is going to be the beyond line of sight. Like I said, we work with Irvine PD, and we try and make sure that we meet all the FAA guidelines and make sure that we follow their rules and regulations. At the same time, we did apply for a waiver, FAA waiver, to do the beyond line of sight, so that we don't have to frequently call the SOSC, which is the Washington D.C. number, in order to get clearance to fly. Or if you're not going to go through those FAA, if you're going to break those FAA policies, contact Washington D.C. They're going to give you a clearance in order to meet your objective for the fire emergency. So we applied for the waivers through Irvine PD. We're able to get the beyond the line of sight, which is a very big assistance, especially on the wildland incidents as well. We have usually anywhere between, and Captain Gifford can attest to this, you can go anywhere between 2 to 3 acres, and you could jump into 15, 20 acres within a matter of a couple minutes. So we need that coverage, and the UAS is able to provide that range or that picture ability in order to generate those maps, make sure that we are able to provide better information for our incident commanders. So our biggest thing has been beyond the line of sight. As far as flying over people, we usually don't do much of that. A lot of the stuff that we do, like I say, we're more of a smaller operation. I can see Captain Gifford, he's more of a Firescope out in the campaign fires, doing a lot more GIS mapping. We're more just honed into Orange County and small vegetation fires, some small commercial fires. So our biggest thing was the beyond line of sight. We were able to attain that with the waiver. At the same time, we're not looking to see anything else that can assist us. We try not to fly over people, and if it is, it's just more our own personnel. But at the same time, we've already contacted the SOSC, which is the Washington, D.C. hotline, in order to get clearance, in order to bypass all those waivers if we foresee something as far as that we're going to be breaking some of the FAA policies. So our biggest thing, like you stated before, beyond line of sight is number one priority for us. We're able to do it with the waiver. And then as far as that, keeping our operations as small, as not as complex, but maybe Captain Gifford can give you more of a broader spectrum of how it is on a campaign fire. As far as Orange County specific, we only range anywhere between 3 to 15 acres. So we don't need much more than what we already kind of have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep, thanks. And Dave, any insight on the kind of the regulatory hurdles that you're looking to clear?
They are very much the same as Frank was talking about. You know, we do have with our waivers beyond visual line of sight capabilities when we're under a TFR. So, you know, as long as we can continue to maintain that level of operational capacity. One of the things that I think is coming down the road that is going to be critical to airspace coordination is that remote ID. You know, there's some work being done out there through a number of different groups trying to figure out how we can have a more comprehensive view of the airspace, both manned and unmanned, and that every pilot, whether it's a manned or an unmanned, but the pilot can see the other aircraft, and that I think is going to become a really important part of our operational work, especially on these larger campaign fires where we have, you know, maybe multiple agencies, tens to hundreds of thousands of acres, multiple jurisdictions, multiple airspace concerns. I think once we can integrate the all of the different kinds of aircraft to include aircraft that aren't supposed to be there. You know, we have a lot of infringements just with hobbyists out there who are looky-looing around, just trying to get a view of the fire, take a snapshot or whatever it is. You know, they don't think they're causing any harm, and a lot of days they don't, but some days they do, and we have to shut down our aviation operations. So kind of another parallel effort that's underway is Uas Detection Efforts. And so I think all of that kind of comes together under the same heading of, you know, just airspace coordination and making sure that the people we have up there can see each other, you know, under quotation marks, through some sort of a, you know, an ID system, and that we're doing our best to make sure that the folks who should not be flying in our airspace aren't, and that if they are, we're able to you know, put a stop to that rather quickly. We just, you know, as both the manned and unmanned side comes together in the same airspace, we're just going to have more and more opportunities for conflict, and so deconflicting that airspace is critical. So any efforts towards that end will be a huge help for us.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. And maybe we'll slide into the next question now. And this was mentioned earlier about budgets. And you know, the funding for these programs is of a key concern. And I mean, the budgets are always top of mind for local governments, especially, which obviously extends to fire departments and other public safety agencies. And thinking about the massive impacts from COVID-19 and how that's played out on, you know, governmental budgets, how do you think that new high-tech programs like drones are faring on the chopping block? And is there really a need for the federal fire service grants to kind of extend the UAS, you know, grants such as, you know, FEMA has, you know, especially for the volunteer side, the Assistance of Firefighters grants, other fire service grants? You know, is that something that we really see as a need for this industry to continue and to expand? I'll turn to you first, Ryan.
So I definitely see funding as being one of the major hurdles to building a good, properly built program. And I think that the hard part is that with the advent of DJI's ecosystem, right, having a lot of aircraft to choose from and having them be relatively low priced in terms of compared to American-made products or other made products, a lot of agencies have been able to get into and build programs without having really the adequate funding to fund the program fully. So they've developed programs using inexpensive aircraft, and then they've kind of topped down. And that's a problem that we're seeing a lot of. And unfortunately, it's really not helped by the lack of available quality aircraft that meet the mission-specific needs that are being made in the US. So that's a double-edged sword. Everything here is going to be more expensive. That's just part of the deal. So one of the things I always tell vendors when we speak with them is, you know, you're not dealing with oil, gas, and electric. You need to drop zeros off the end of what you think our budget is, because it's just not there. So if you want to introduce a product and you want it to be utile for public safety, the first piece of it being utile is that it's affordable. If we can't afford to buy it, upkeep it, maintain it, and replace it, then it never gets used. So it's just not something that works for us. And I've had that discussion with more than one vendor on more than one occasion, and they all kind of look at you like, but it's the government, they have money. And you're like, no, it's not. There is no money. So in reference specifically to like the current budgets and what's going on, there are definitely agencies that are taking big hits. I can tell you that I'm fairly unaware of any agency that, at least that I'm aware of in California, that's properly budgeted for UAS. That's just, unfortunately, the nature of the fire service, but it's also the nature of this beast, where it's easy to look at, hey, what does it cost to buy an aircraft or two and go fly them around? But you don't recognize the rest of the costs that go behind that, whether it's training hours, maintenance cycles, whatever it may be. And that's all stuff that has to be budgeted for. And an improperly budgeted program is going to run into major issues. You'll lose a whole bunch of batteries at once. How do you replace them? What do you do if you don't have a budget for it? So I would like to say that there's a lot of room for grant funding and for additional monies to come in. The problem is that, you know, grants aren't free. They come with major restrictions, and you have to meet those restrictions. And that can be difficult depending on how you're structured and what you're trying to do. Within our regional group, we've been fortunate that as several agencies being represented across a region, we're able to secure some money federally that was part of UASI, so Urban Areas Security Initiative. So that's one of the things I recommend to people is, as their agencies are looking to form programs, is, hey, look to your neighbors, and forming a regional group gives you a lot of leverage when you go speak to, whether it's a UASI, a regional UASI, or it's somebody else, because it's not just you. It's not just Metro Fire asking for money. It's an entire region looking for asset and resource, and whether that's training dollars or it's hardware, that's a thing. So, you know, budgets are always going to be a difficult thing, and technology is one of those things that outpaces the traditional fire service tool. We can put a halogen on an engine or a truck, and it will last for forever. That just doesn't work with technology. So technology times out, and technology has to be replaced. And so if you're not thinking 24 to 36 months down the road with your budgeting, and your budget doesn't support that process, you can find yourself with a lot of obsolete tools that don't get the mission done, and the program falls apart or just stalls out. And I think that that's a very real possibility, especially in the next couple years, to see that happen, as I believe prices of aircraft are going to go up as more American companies get involved with it. Especially if the federal government continues or expands bans on overseas aircraft being used. So I don't think it's a good picture going forward, to be honest with you, from a budget standpoint. And I think that that's a challenge that you're going to see, especially for larger programs, just because there's more dollars involved.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and we can drill down on that. You know, I think all three of you mentioned, you know, you guys use DJI products. You know, that's one company based in China, and you alluded to the fact that, you know, there's a federal policy push on that front. So for, I mean, especially for you guys, if you're using that technology, and as you mentioned, there's you know, the market right now, a large chunk of the market, especially for that specific equipment that you guys need, you know, is sometimes only available or only, you know, cost effective to use, you know, some equipment from companies that are outside of the U.S. How do you guys use some of these policies that are being pushed at the national level? Now, Dave, for example, I know, you know, with your previous work with the federal government, I mean, you probably saw it firsthand. And the Department of the Interior had one of the most robust federal programs in supporting UAS, and then that was killed by the secretarial order. And then you've got the White House pushing a draft executive order now that would not only ban funding and procurement of, you know, especially namely Chinese aircraft, but also prohibit their flight over any federally managed lands, which would, you know, extend, you know, a lot of people don't realize how expansive that is, but that's pretty massive. And that's, of course, not just for the aircraft themselves, but aircraft that contain parts from overseas. And then you also have, currently pending right now in the National Defense Authorization Act, I mean, we could see very soon provisions of that moving into law to prevent federal funding, being tied to bans on those type of aircraft, and then of course on the federal procurement as well. Dave, let's start with you. Kind of what's your vision of that? Is all under the idea here is cybersecurity. What's your experience with that?
All right. Well, thank you, Justin. Well, I'll just cut right to the chase. It's extremely troubling to me, both as a former federal employee and now as a current business owner in the industry, where the things like the secretarial order or the draft executive order have taken us, and I can speak specifically to the Department of Interior because I was, like you mentioned, a Department of Interior employee for many, many years. My belief is that this is, right, wrong, or indifferent, this is a political move. It does not have any basis in cybersecurity. The government edition software that DJI has provided for the drones that we're using on wildland fires has been proven time and time again through numerous different studies to not leak data. On top of all that, we don't hook those that data set up to any government network computers. It's just a non-issue in my opinion, in terms of it being a real cybersecurity threat. Unfortunately, what has happened is we have now transferred the risk that these UAS were, the risk that was removed through the use of UAS has now been transferred back to the firefighters and the manned aircraft pilots and the Department of Interior, because they can no longer, train and fly those UAS. So it's a huge step backwards in my opinion. And again, it feels very political. And I'm not, I'm going to stay out of the politics side of this, but I just really disagree with when politics threatens human life and safety issues like it has in my opinion right now. One of the other really troubling things that I've seen recently is there's with the DOI, pretty much that whole program was shut down with that secretarial order. There is an approved list of drones that that agencies can use, but now you have to purchase them through a GSA schedule. And whereas before, and I'll just use some generic, I'm not going to give company names, but I'll just use generic names and some real numbers. One company A, provided a drone that we could go buy off the shelf for about $700. Now through the GSA schedule, that costs $14,000. It's the same drone. It has the same level of encryption. Nothing has changed other than it's an approved drone through a GSA schedule that now costs the taxpayer 20 times the amount that it used to. So I'm troubled by this, Justin. I don't have all the answers, but I just really think that in the name of public safety and specifically wildland firefighter safety, we really need to kind of move back towards utilizing the best available equipment. I completely get it'd be nice to have American-made stuff. I'm not opposed to that. I'm very pro-American stuff. I think that's a good idea, but until we have that stuff in our hands, I don't think we should throw proven, cost-effective technology out.
I'd like to dovetail on what Dave was saying. That secretarial shutdown of DOI single-handedly stopped the state of California from approving a statewide OES response with UAS. Firescope and OES want the program, the state program, to mirror the Fed program for all the right reasons. I understand that. The classes that the Fed requires, which are not all risk classes, they're just wildland classes. So we have to put additional classes for qualification on our folks because we fly all risk. Those classes were completely shut. So you couldn't get to the class. You couldn't bring an instructor in to teach the class. It just all went into freeze. So it goes beyond just the impact on federal lands. And that is a huge impact on federal lands or on federal funding, because as far as, that funding stream goes, you can still buy it with local money. You can still buy DJI products with local money. You just can't buy them with federal money until they extend that, and we'll see what that looks like. But even beyond that, it has stopped the entire rollout in the state of California. We do not have a functional statewide deployment system this year because of that DOI freeze. The aircraft that are flying over campaign fires, over huge fires, some of the biggest fires in the history of the state, are flying on one-off missions that aren't coordinated through the OES program the way they're supposed to be, because we can't get the classes that the pilots need to meet the minimum requirements as set by NWCG and the Fed, so that we can be in alignment with that. And I understand the state's rationale for wanting to be there. I get that. It makes a lot of sense. But here we are in a holding pattern with agencies that can go out of county, that are ready to go out of county, that are trained for it, but they can't get a class that is, by reading the curriculum, a fairly low-level class. But since we can't get the class, we can't even finish building the program. So we're not 6 months out from starting a program if they flip the switch today. We're 18 months out, because we have to get authorization to have the class held, bring the class to California, get the class approved through state fire training, train the trainers, then roll the trainers out to train the other agency pilots in how to meet the minimums as set by the Fed before they can open task books and get qualified to then go out of county. So this isn't something that holds us up for a couple months. This is something that sets us back years from a fully developed statewide response. And it's just that class, right? It's that holdup. It doesn't have anything to do with the product. It has to do with, we're gonna freeze this whole thing. So the trickle down is really significant, and it goes beyond just the dollars and cents, as Dave spoke to. It really goes into public safety at some point, because, man, to have these tools available and a proven track record of these tools being used properly, and then not being able to deploy them, that hurts. That's tough for anybody who's involved in public safety. You know, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, no, I feel it on the micro level, just in the volunteer service world. We've been trying to get some of this equipment to be grant eligible, because I mean, budgets at the local, very local level, just we're talking about individual 501c3 companies. I mean, the money's just not there, and it would be a shame if we never get the opportunity to have that federal funding extend, in a lot of cases to that. Frank, anything to add from your side on this issue?
No, like Captain Gifford said, I sit on the Firescope as well. All the pertinent information that he described is exactly what we're dealing with. We just had one of our chief officers request if we had that, I believe it was the S-234 class, and I said, hey, that's exactly the issue we're running into. We can't even have the class. We can't even have it on our task book. So how can we start a task book if the class 8 is not available to us? So everything what Captain Gifford said, he's all sits on that Firescope panel. I sit on there as well. But it's just a big hurdle that we have to try and get over. And as far as the local, we're just doing local operations just in our jurisdiction. And unfortunately, we can't go out of our county, out of our jurisdiction to provide some sort of service for the state of California. But it's unfortunate, and it's a lot of legislative, political push behind it. But it's just, I guess, if we just keep pushing at it and hopefully it'll open up one day and we're able to go outside of our Orange County jurisdiction.
Thanks for that as well. Kind of on this topic, the reason that, a lot of the elected officials are pushing, or the White House is pushing for some of these country of origin restrictions is, as you mentioned, earlier, cybersecurity concerns, which on its face is kind of a noble concern. I mean, we want to ensure cybersecurity and safety, and privacy. But what maybe Dave or Ryan, if you could speak to what protections, and I think you already mentioned earlier that the government edition and enterprise edition drones and not logging in this onto government servers or anything like that. But what are your departments or any other departments you're aware of doing to protect data and privacy? And is this something that you think can be mentioned or can be handled by kind of policies and procedures and best practices, and maybe even eventually standards as well?
Yeah, Justin, Dave again. I'll briefly address that. I've mentioned some of it, and I did not bring the list with me today, but there are a number of different independent studies. I know INEL, that the Idaho Nuclear Lab. I can't remember the exact acronym there. Department of Homeland Security. I think NASA did something. Anyway, there's been a number of, and the Department of Interior did extensive testing. None of those independent tests have discovered any cybersecurity data leaks. And so we're very confident that we're on the right path. Like you mentioned also, that we are not connecting those devices up to government servers. So we feel that is the best management practice. We've got a lot of PII privacy information kinds of do's and don'ts that we teach to our remote pilots, so that they're not out there, taking video of things they shouldn't be. It's strictly for the wildland fire operation. But if we do happen to collect anything that's PII, it's immediately turned over to the incident management team in the case of a large fire, and then destroyed or kept with the official record. But it's not ever, doesn't ever go beyond that. So, I think there's probably some more best management practices and different kind of regulation that we could build as individual agencies, and maybe even make them standards. But I certainly feel like we're on the right path. Currently, I would be very interested to hear what Captain Gifford has to say on this as well.
Well, I think that I haven't been shown anything credible that says that there's a data leak through DJI equipment. I'm not saying there's not. I mean, sure, there's always a possibility of something. But referencing the studies that Dave was talking about, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that as an issue. So maybe folks in Washington know more about it. I don't think that just because you shut down foreign aircraft, that doesn't fix a data security issue. It fixes a foreign data security issue, but what's to say that other aircraft aren't streaming data out through unprotected servers or whatever that may be? And so when you start talking about cybersecurity and data security, it goes way beyond just country of origin. Yeah, that is one facet of it. And my opinion is that DJI has done due diligence and that they don't have a data leak, but that's just my opinion. That doesn't mean anything. But I think when we start talking about the broader stroke of what are we doing for data security, that pushes way beyond UAS in its entirety. I mean, most agencies now have policies on how they use cell phones, how they use video, what do they do with gathered information. I mean, God, unless you live under a rock, you've seen that every law agency out there is being pressed on their video gathering, audio gathering, how they're treating it, what they're doing with it. And there's valid concerns to all that. But I think that the focus of data security goes way beyond just UAS, right? It goes everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. How are we moving data back and forth between our mobile data terminals within the rigs themselves? How are we dealing with video capture for anything that we're doing? What are we doing with our cell phones? Are we doing location tracking with personal cell phones, with district cell phones? Or are we using personal cell phones for district needs? Is that a problem? So I think that as agencies continue to build out technology, policies, protocols, best practices, et al., I think that we'll see more and more of this become an issue. And I'm pretty convinced that nobody has this figured out. I think at this point in time, a true secure data network, a truly secured, cyber secured system exists, but it's not within any sort of price range that any municipality can afford, nor are they using it. Even for law enforcement, the level of encryption and the limit of what they're encrypting, that's limiting them from using additional technologies because Axon can only support certain technologies, right? But if we focus just on the UAS portion and just on the cybersecurity of overseas aircraft, I mean, I'd like to see some better data that supports it. I'm all in favor. I want to see American companies do well, right? I think that most of us are in that boat, like buy American when you can, but I'm not 100% convinced that they have any better security, data security or encryption than anybody else does out there. And pretty much guarantee you if they do, and if they sell it that way, it's going to quadruple the price of anything you touch, not to mention the back end and infrastructure that goes in there. So yeah, I don't see us in a good spot with that. And it's very concerning from a ground level guy, from a guy who rides around on a fire truck, the fact that we're letting that kind of that concern dictate tools that we can utilize in a broader sense to help with life safety of the citizenry that we serve. That unfortunately kind of starts to sound like politics. And again, I hope that's not the case, and I hope we find a way around it. And I hope that everybody comes to a conclusion that, hey, this is good for us and it's secure and it lets us do our job. But I think we're a ways off from that, honestly.
No, I appreciate it. And look, as a Washington guy myself, it's always fun to get people fired up on policy. So this has been a fun discussion, for sure. And definitely one that, I can certainly see affecting the fire service, front and center. So there's a lot going on in this at the moment. So, with the, especially on the Hill with the NDAA, we'll see things happening within days. And, I guess we're in the midst of an election, so we'll see what comes out of the White House. But, it's certainly great to get your guys' perspective on that issue. So in order, in an effort to kind of start to wrap up here a little bit, I just wanted to kind of throw one high-level question at you. There's 50,000+ public safety organizations across the country, whether it be, police, fire, or otherwise. And, I think I know the number is growing that are using UAS programs for sure. But just curious, you guys are some of the early leaders, in this technology, across the country. Kind of what's your sense of where we are and where we're going? Is this something that's becoming easier to get kind of institutional acceptance on? I've encountered issues just with, my home departments and so forth. UAS is still kind of new, and we don't know if we want to get into that yet. And, do you think this is something we're going to start to see, maybe even eventually the majority of public safety departments getting involved with, or not? Gabe, you want to take it first, or Frank, either one?
I'll take it. I mean, for me, I think the biggest thing, and we did a field trip over to Menlo Park, is our department has only been able to give us buy-in only because we've shown them the products that we could produce. And it's going back to the funding issue. They've only given us about maybe a fraction of what we need in order to be a successful program. And the way that our department works is show us what you can do. Show us what this UAS that you say can perform these different tasks. And you can have some quantitative data, some physical data, physical products, and you're able to present that to your upper management, and that's better able to sell your program. That's the direction that we took, and that's the direction that we've grown. It definitely has been difficult from start all the way to where we are now, where we've had to have that buy-in by showing those products. But I think in the future, it's always going to be difficult in order to sell your product to the administration and grow your product, because technology is always changing, policies are always changing, and you need to be able to adapt. But as long as you can show those products to your upper management, I think it's gonna give a lot of buy-in, and they're gonna be able to provide funding. But it's definitely gonna make it a little bit harder. I think it's gonna just keep getting harder. But at the same time, as long as you're educated and you're up on all the policies, I think you do a safe operation and you provide a good product, the technology, the UAS itself will be able to provide a significant enough intel or a significant enough project in order to sell that program.
Yeah, and Justin, Dave here, I'll tag in a little bit too. I think as we talked about a little bit earlier, that there was a real hesitancy probably on most fire departments and agencies, early entry into UAS, just because it was a new thing and no one really knew what it was going to be capable of. There was a lot of headaches associated with it. There was a cost. There was there was just a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if we've reached a tipping point yet collectively as the Wildland Fire Service, but if we haven't, I'd say we're awfully close, where it's just going to be accepted, and I would say go so far as to say it's going to be expected that that's just the service you're going to be able to provide. We're going to look back, and I think it was you, Justin, who said this. We're going to look back 20 or 30 years from now and have a very difficult time remembering what fighting fires without UAS looked like, because it's going to become such an ingrained part of what we do, and we're going to rely on it so incredibly strongly to just provide us probably things we can't even think of right now, but the things that we are using it for right now, I think will just continue to grow in all aspects. There's the public service piece that I'm most familiar with. It has been the wildland firefighting, but as both these other gentlemen have mentioned, there's a whole lot of other things that go on out there with the public service agencies. There's search and rescue, there's law enforcement, there's just a ton of different things. So I just think it's going to be a part of our society. You look at the big companies out there, Google, Amazon. These guys have invested heavily in drone delivery systems. This is here to stay. We need to figure out how to make it all work together. And I guess that would be the final point that I would close on is I think as we do move forward, as we're pushing towards faster, better technology, making sure that we're not going so fast that we're missing the steps necessary to keep everybody safe out there. Integrating, you know, again, this is my narrow slice of the world here, but with the fire service side of it, making sure that we are able to integrate, because if there are 50,000+ public service agencies out there, and every one of them has multiple drones, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for flying things to have issues up there with each other. So just making sure that we're moving forward in a responsible way that keeps everybody safe. So I look forward to that day.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate that. And you know, for everyone, also, I know we have a lot of questions coming in from the attendees here, and what we'll do is we'll compile these and send them to our panelists, and you know, you guys can feel free to send any answers back to us, and we'll blast them out for sure, and try to connect the dots on some of these as well. And again, I just want to take this chance to say thank you again to an awesome panel. I'm always in awe and have a great deal of respect for career firefighters, you know, across the board, but especially the three of you, I'm kind of jealous, and for all different reasons. I mean, Frank, with being a firefighter down in Orange County, I mean, you can't ask for a much better place. And Ryan, with being that kind of skiing within an hour and a half drive or so, I probably wouldn't get much work done. And then Dave, I was watching Playing with Fire with my girls the other day, and I'm kind of realizing that you're the real life John Cena. So that's pretty cool too. So thanks so much, all you guys. And I really appreciate it. And this is super insightful. And we hope to have you guys back soon. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Justin.